Coming up on this week's edition of NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen.
Ranching on public lands is a cornerstone of the West and a vital part of the beef industry. We'll explore the challenge and opportunities that these families face as they work to protect the land and, of course, their way of life.
And now, NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen. I'm Russell Nemitz, and thanks for joining us. Well, public lands ranchers face a complex mix of challenges and opportunities as they navigate the changing landscape of land use policies, environmental regulations, and of course, economic pressures. But public lands ranchers also play a crucial role in feeding the world, as well as preserving the land for future generations. Today, I'm here with a very knowledgeable group of people who can help shed some light on this very important topic. First is Caitlin Glover, Executive Director of the Public Lands Council and the National Cattlemen's Beef Association Government Affairs. Alongside her is Tim Canterbury, President of the Public Lands Council and a fifth-generation rancher out of Colorado. And our final panelist is Skye Krebs, NCBA's 2024 Policy Division Vice Chair and past President of the Public Lands Council, who, by the way, also owns a multi-generational ranch in Oregon. Thank you, lady and gentlemen, for joining us today here on Cattlemen to Cattlemen to talk about this very important topic and, of course, your way of life, ranching on public lands. And Caitlin, I guess as we kind of kick things off, why don't you give us a little bit of an idea about the number of public lands ranchers out there and the acres that are involved and how many animals they're managing?
Russell, I think it's a lot bigger than most people think. Across the West, we have 640 million acres of public lands. Now, not all of those are grazed, right? You have somewhere on the order of 250 million acres that are grazed, something around the order of 17 million animal unit months, what the amount of forage that it takes to feed a cow or a cow-calf pair for 30 days. All across those landscapes, you have approximately 22,000 grazing permits. So ranchers in the 14 western states who have these vast open spaces manage hundreds of millions of acres as part of their own operations.
Yeah, it's an incredible amount of land, an incredible amount of animals, and just a critically important part of the U.S. beef cattle industry. Tim, don't a lot of families out there have a deep connection to these lands, even though they don't necessarily own them?
Yes, Russell. And by the way, thanks for having us here today. I appreciate that. And I speak very closely with my connection to Colorado on this one, but most families are multi-generational families, been taking care of that land for generations. Even though they don't own it, we truly are very connected to the land because, it's kind of branded in our brains when we're born. Take care of the land, it'll take care of you. And so that's how we grow up. We watch the previous generations and we think about ways to improve to move into the future. So even though they don't own those lands, they have been taking care of them for generations and are very proud of what they've left behind for the next generation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Skye, you're also a multi-generational family from Oregon. Just expand on that a little bit. I mean, whether we're talking about Colorado or Oregon or another state out in the West, I mean, Tim is absolutely right.
Well, just to build a little bit more on that, not only connected to the land, but besides the land itself, the next most permanent fixture out there is probably the permittee or the permittee's family. A lot of our permittees predate these agencies. Going back to the grazing districts on the BLM and the Forest Reserve on the forest side of things, a lot of these generations were there before those agencies were even established. So we've been doing it a long time. Agencies come and go, administrations come and go, but the constant thing that's out there besides the land itself is more than likely the permittee. Have seen things, been through the catastrophes of the wildfires and the infestation. So huge amount of knowledge there that how do you make that land sustainable and keep it working?
Well, and along those lines, I mean, how important is it too is for your families, with the next generation coming up, to keep America's federal lands in the same family so that you can pass that knowledge on, that you guys received from your dads and granddads?
Well, I'll take a run at that, Russell. These lands are not the easiest ones to manage. So there is a huge amount of indigenous knowledge that comes down. They're either in a dry climate or a high climate where it takes a special piece of expertise. How do you make an economic unit that can function there? And how important those economic units are, not just to the family, but to our communities too. Without access to those federal lands, a lot of these rural communities would have it a whole lot tougher.
I agree 100%, Sky. You think about all the things that these families bring to the table. Been there for generations. They've helped mold those rural communities, school boards, water districts, county commissioners, you name it. They are the backbone, and without those federal lands to keep those ranches viable and sustainable, we wouldn't have that.
Caitlin, in your position with PLC and the NCBA, obviously you get to work with all of America's public lands, ranchers and users out there. From your perspective, spend a lot of time in Washington, D.C., but you're from Wyoming, right? And, what are some of the biggest challenges of being a public lands rancher, from your view?
So, Russell, public lands ranchers exist and public lands exist because they were the lands that weren't homesteaded. They often don't have access to a lot of water, they're rockier, they're just tougher terrain. And whether or not these ranchers own these acres or whether they lease them as part of their public lands grazing allotments, that deep connection is why I do what I do. I live in Washington, I'm from Wyoming, but I have the best job in Washington because I get to work for these folks. The challenges are immense, though. They're the challenges that every producer across the country faces. The decisions about how to make the best decision for your family so that you can pass it on. How do you make economic sense in a market that's challenging and often dependent on Mother Nature? But that overlay of the federal government, obviously, as a landlord, does make things a little bit tougher. And so often, I think the biggest challenge is juggling all of those things because it is such a complex management scenario.
Tim, what are you seeing as some of the biggest challenges as a public lands rancher?
Probably the biggest challenge that we face is how do we deal with all the other multiple uses that are taking place on those lands while we're trying to graze livestock. And firm believer in multiple use, back it 100%. I think as Sky mentioned, administrations come and go, and I think those challenges change how we operate to meet the needs of those multiple uses while we try to continue grazing livestock out there. Whether it's recreation, it's hiking, timbering, mining, all the things that take place out there on those lands. And quite frankly, I'm blessed to live where I do. If I had to survive in a metropolitan area, I might struggle just a little bit. So I understand why we all cherish these public lands and we all want to recreate on them. But we have to keep in mind while we're out there, there are other uses and figure out how we commingle that.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of just wrapping things up with this segment, Sky, what about the perception? Not just the perception of Main Street society of public lands ranchers, but, how do we build upon and educate, getting over maybe some of those challenging speed bumps within our own industry from ranchers across America who don't utilize public lands, and they see that you guys are paying $1.35 AUM, and man, these guys are just living right out in the West. That's something we have to work on too.
For sure. You look at the base grazing fee on a certainly look super attractive to a private lands person. But what doesn't get put into the mix is how the additional costs that we don't do a good a job about portraying. Tim's into virtual fencing on his allotment there. Huge amount of money spent out of his pocket to go out there and manage those federal lands. Water infrastructure projects that the permittee puts in and maintains, and those not only benefit the livestock, they benefit the wildlife. Happened to be on a permittee's place this last summer, and every time he put in a water feature, he had to barricade it so the bears wouldn't tear it up, and he's on the hook for that, armoring those deals, because the bears just love these water troughs. Additional costs like that don't get put into the mix. You look at the basic $135, but the additional bother factors that come in, you're not allowed to use it all. You only use your part of it and leave the rest for the wildlife. A lot of additional costs and there's been studies, and when it comes out, we're paying every bit as much as a private lease as you do on a federal lease. It's just our base fee is a lot smaller, and our additional costs are a lot higher.
We're going to leave it right there for now because we have a lot more ground to cover, including how the issues facing public lands ranchers impact the beef industry as a whole. So please stay with us. We'll have more right after this.
Grazing and pasture management is really the critical first step in our cow-calf operation. Without good quality pastures, good quality forage, it'd be really tough to make it with a cow-calf operation.
Are you concerned about the impact government policies could have on your cattle business? One way to make your voice heard in Washington is by joining NCBA. When you join, you'll be part of the nation's oldest and largest national cattle industry organization that has a professional team working in Washington, D.C. on issues that matter to cattle-producing families nationwide. Don't stay on the sidelines. Make your voice heard by joining NCBA today at the website ncba.org.
Welcome back to this special edition of Cattlemen to Cattlemen as we discuss public lands ranching. And Tim, I want to get right into it and discuss why these Western lands issues, like the Public Lands Council and everything you guys are working on, is not just important to Western ranchers, but really the entire U.S. beef cattle industry.
Well, I think we all need to understand, as Caitlin mentioned earlier, the number of acres that are being grazed. It all comes down to economics 101, if you will. There are a number of cattle on federal lands in the West. And I'll just use Colorado as an example. A little over 3 million acres of federal lands. 85% of the 3 million head of cattle in Colorado spend some portion of their life on federal lands. Now that's big. That covers a lot of acres and a significant number of cattle. So I think we have to consider the economics involved, impact that it will have on the industry throughout those cattle's life.
And Russell, it's 85% in Colorado of those cows that spend time on public lands. Across the West, that's 63% in any given year. So you look at 2022, 63% of those cows spent time on public lands. Certainly some of those, that year's calves moved off, moved into other parts of the country, and you have a new calf crop. So that number continues to build. They feed into the rest of the national supply chain. And so those lands are integral, not just to the regional stability, but to the national supply chain. If you have that forage taken away, or if you see the impact of wildfire, you see that all the way down the supply chain, all the way to the grocery store. So these lands are incredibly impactful. They have an outsized impact on the national industry.
Absolutely. So Skye, what role do environmental regulations such as endangered species protections play in limiting or even altering our grazing practices?
Oh man, Russell, that's a big one. There's so many ESA regulations that we deal with on the federal lands, whether it be the sage grouse listing and taking some of those lands out of production for conserving sage grouse. the fish issues in the Northwest, dealing with the salmon and the steelhead recovery that's coming back, the reintroduction of the gray wolf, these all affect the grazing patterns, but science is on our side. I'll take the sage grouse issue that we just got a study out of the University of Idaho that shows that grazing is actually beneficial to the recovery of the sage grouse. So we need to get more and more of those types of scientific studies out there to show that grazing is a positive for these lands, not only just for the economic of the livestock industry, but for the wildlife as well.
So Caitlin, maybe describe what your stance is on the growing opposition to public land grazing from environmental groups.
You know, public lands grazing can often be divisive because it's very regional, and so only a certain number of people see it in any given year. I don't think that the opposition to public lands grazing is growing. I think it's changing and it's a little more visible, maybe because of social media or other means. But the good work that Tim and Sky do and the thousands of other public lands ranchers do is growing in sort of the social consciousness, right? People like cows, they like sheep, they want to understand more. And so it's more of an education for the public and then a very targeted opposition to the people who want to take them out of business. There is that opposition. There are those people. But I think that they continue to dwindle, and I think their methods continue to get more desperate as time goes on.
Hey, Tim, I was just going to come to you next. I mean, doesn't that make it even just more important than ever for like producers like yourself that are utilizing America's federal lands to tell your story and deepen that connection and that relationship to that non-livestock producer?
So Russell, absolutely. And I guess I maybe have a little different take. Rather, I look at it as education opportunities. We have to educate. You know, as we move cattle on and off of our allotments, we meet a lot of people. There are, for whatever reason, that they're out there in the multiple use. Once they understand what we're doing, what we're providing, that their whole aspect, I have found, changes on the way we're doing business out there. So I look at it maybe as not growing opposition. I look at it as a chances for opportunity to educate so they understand the benefits our cattle is doing to those public lands and what we're going to leave for the next generation of recreation.
Can I take it a step farther, Russell? We just come through one of the worst wildfire seasons for a long time. And we proved time and time again that grazing reduces the wildfire risk. So I'll bet there's a lot of people in California right now wish they'd have had some kind of grazing on those hills. And we see it in the West all the time, the ability to use livestock to graze in fire breaks to reduce fine fuels. So as they breathe smoke all summer long, maybe they're starting to put the connection, geez, if we just had some livestock grazing out there, maybe we wouldn't be in the smoke all summer. So opportunity to educate.
Well, there's a lot of opportunity, and just thank goodness that public lands ranchers like yourself and America's General Society has groups like NCBA and Public Lands Council watching and working on everyone's behalf. When we come back, though, we're going to continue our discussion of public lands grazing and its importance to the beef industry. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Cattle producers across the country work hard to care for their animals and their land. The USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service is there to help. Find out how you can work with NRCS to develop a conservation plan for your operation. Find possible funding resources for implementing conservation practices, or get free expert advice on ways to improve your farm or ranch. Visit the website nrcs.usda.gov today.
Join the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. NCBA is the oldest and largest national cattle industry organization working to defend your interests in Washington, D.C. And there are big benefits to being a member. You get news you can use in the National Cattlemen, email updates in the NCBA Beef Bulletin, plus big discounts only for NCBA members. Join by calling 866-233-3872 or online at ncba.org.
This beef quality assurance tip is funded by the Beef Checkoff.
Hi, Jolie Fitzsimons here to talk to you today about the Beef Quality Assurance Program and our online BQA modules. If you've been certified online before, you can now go back and look up your certificate or get recertified online. Go to bqa.org under the certification tab to get logged in. Don't worry if you forgot your password. You can reset it on the site or reach out to customer support for assistance. If you've never been certified before, we'd love for you to head to bqa.org today and get signed up.
The Beef Quality Assurance Program is funded by the Beef Checkoff.
Welcome back as we continue our discussion of public lands grazing. And Caitlin, before the break, we were talking about wildfire and how livestock can help mitigate severe wildfire risks.
So grazing is an incredibly powerful tool to reduce fire risk across the board, but then also to reduce severity. We have some really great work out of California across the board that demonstrates that when you apply grazing to the landscape, you have a 45% reduced risk of wildfire happening at all. Now, not all fire is bad, but when you think about the 1,000 pounds of fine fuel that an individual animal can get rid of, can consume and take off the landscape, that has an immense potential when you apply that across public lands.
Yeah, that truly is incredible. So Tim, how do the work of these families like yourself, make the land healthier and more resilient?
So I think, as we talked about generations of being on the lands, we have embraced technology as we move into the future. So whether we're getting better management by virtual fence, the number of tools that's out there, and we are making those lands much more resilient to fires, to drought, all those things by the proper rotational grazing and management of those livestock while they're out there on the land.
Sky, what do you think?
We're the eyes and ears. We're out there every day on those lands, seeing it change. If there's a weed infestation, they're there to take care of it. First responders to make sure that the land is healthy and continuing to provide forage, which is good for everything.
Yeah, I can't imagine America's public lands without livestock and ranchers like yourselves on them. Stay with us. We'll be back to wrap up our show right after this.
You always know where this one is. But what about this one? Or this one? Imagine knowing your machines the way you know your cattle, where they are and what they need. Data like that could make a difference. You can make better decisions for more efficiency, consistency, productivity. That's the power of technology. Get started with Operations Center today.
Mark your calendar for an important event, the Cattle Industry Summer Business Meeting. Cattlemen and women from across the country will gather to set policy priorities, discuss critical issues, and get a first look at the beef industry long-range plan. Don't miss this opportunity to collaborate with your fellow industry leaders to help shape the future of the beef cattle industry. The Cattle Industry Summer Business Meeting, July 7th to the 9th in San Diego. Register now at ncba.org.
Join the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. There are big benefits to being a member. You'll get industry news in the National Cattlemen, email updates in the NCBA Beef Bulletin, plus discounts just for NCBA members. Join by calling 866-233-3872 or online at ncba.org.
Welcome back. As we wrap up our program, I'd like each of our panelists now to share some final thoughts on this very important issue. Sky?
Well, the public lands access to our grazing herds is baked into our supply chain. If we lost that forage base and those numbers, we're going to lose packing, we're going to lose feedlots, we're going to lose trucking, drug companies, feed companies. So it's all part of our food security. Food security is national security, so it's baked in there.
And I think emerging technology, let's not be afraid to embrace it. Let's not be afraid of change. It makes us all better operators. It sheds a whole new light on the way we do business in federal lands. in the West.
And Russell, when we're thinking about public lands ranching, there's this nostalgia, this image of the cowboy managing these vast open spaces. But I think what is really clear from both Sky and Tim, that there is an incredible economic and environmental and sustainability component. And so as we look at the American West, it is a crucial part of the American industry. And there really is no difference between a producer in California or a producer in Florida.
Great discussion, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, don't forget that the Public Lands Council works every day to support Western ranchers by advocating for them and educating decision makers on the value of livestock grazing. Learn how they're making a difference and how you can help by visiting publiclandscouncil.org. Well, that wraps up this edition of NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen. Again, thanks to our wonderful panel for their insights, and thanks to you for watching. We'll see you right here next week on RFD TV.